Hello, 5th grade. Today we're going to be talking about a process known as chromatography. Now, chromatography is actually kind of a chemical technique of separating out chemicals that are in a mixture. So you have a mixture of chemicals, you can separate them out using this technique of chromatography. And it's actually a technique that I used to use when I worked in the laboratory. If you remember, before I came to teach at Covenant, I worked in a laboratory where I did tests on new drugs and medicines. And one of the things that we had to do is we'd get a sample of like a person's blood or their plasma or something that had drug in it, and we had to separate those drug chemicals out of the person's blood. So we'd do some techniques to clean it up, and then we would put it through this big machine, and we could actually separate it out and figure out exactly how much there was in there. It's a pretty cool technique. And you're going to get a chance to do that today in your kitchen. The only difference is when I did it with millions of dollars of equipment, and you guys are going to be doing it with kitchen supplies, and both techniques are fun. So we are going to be focusing on chromatography of ink right now. Now let me explain how chromatography works. So in lots of things that are colored, there's a mixture of colors. So if I have a marker right here, there's probably a mixture of different colored inks in here that go into making it black. And it's not just a single color. So you know how when you're painting you can mix different colors together and get the perfect color? That's what a lot of people do when they make colored markers or colored pens or colored candies or whatever. They mix multiple colors together, and that's why, like, say you look at the ingredients of gummy bears, you're going to see lots of different colors, like yellow 13 and blue 11, all mixed together to make some other color that they want. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be separating out those different colors using the technique of chromatography. Now, I'm going to also go back into my kitchen and actually show you how it's done, but I want to explain the science of it a little bit right now. So, when we're doing chromatography, what we're going to be doing is we're going to have strips of paper. So I'm going to draw a strip of paper on here, and this is actually kind of sideways. Like, we can say like this way is up, and that the other way is down, but because I don't have a lot of room on my board right here, I can't draw a whole lot. So basically the way chromatography works is we're going to put a bit of ink down at the end of one strip of paper. And then what we're going to do is we're going to lower that paper into what is called a solvent. And I'll actually write that down here. And if you can tell by the word solvent, what a solvent does is actually dissolves things. It puts them into a solution. So we're going to have some solvent down here, and it might be water, it might be some sort of alcohol. There's several different things that you can use for a solvent. And we're going to lower the end of the paper into that solvent. So these are kind of waves of water. And what's going to then happen is that solvent is going to start absorbing into the paper and kind of soaking into it. And it's going to start climbing. So the solvent, you'll see the paper starts getting wet, and it keeps going and pushing up along the whole length of the paper. Now, it's a very, very slow process, so you have to be patient when you do this. But very slowly that water will soak in and work its way all the way up that strip of paper. And what happens is when it hits the ink that we have written on there, it's going to actually dissolve some of those colors of the ink. So the ink, you could think of it as it's a little bit sticky maybe, so it likes to stick to certain things. All chemicals like to stick to certain things and don't like to stick to other certain things. And some of the chemicals are really going to like to stick to this solvent. They're really going to just kind of grab on and hold on to it. And then when that solvent pushes along that paper, that ink is actually going to follow along the solvent. It's going to almost be like surfing on the edge of the wave there. That ink's going to be traveling up the paper. Now, other colors of ink, other dyes, they will not hold on to the solvent quite as well, and they might hold on to the paper a little better. And so when the solvent comes and pushes past it, it might still push it up the paper a little bit, but not quite as fast. And because these different chemicals, these different colors are traveling at different speeds, we're going to start to see different bands of color show up. So let's say that this black marker is made up of red, green, and blue ink. We might see different bands of color forming along here as it pushes through. So, say 15 minutes when you come back and look at your paper, this black spot might be almost entirely gone, and the different colors have been pushed out by the solvent, but they travel at different speeds because they have different levels of stickiness to both the solvent and the paper. So they travel at different speeds, and it's kind of like a race. Like, imagine we had a race with some really fast people and some people that were really slow, and maybe some babies that were just crawling. And they all started at the same spot, but they ran at different speeds. The ones that are the fastest are going to pull out ahead, and the ones that are slowest are going to fall behind. And so we get them separated out that way. So, at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move to the kitchen and show you how to actually do this in your own house. Welcome to my kitchen. Here is how we are going to do the chromatography experiment. Let's first look at some of the supplies that you're going to need. You're going to need some glasses. 1 or 2 would be fine. You don't need very many. And usually it's better if you can see into them. It might make it a little nicer to be able to look at what's going on inside the glass. And these are a bit short for the experiment, but any size will work, really. You're also going to need some sources of ink. So I have 3 different colored pens here. If you have markers, those would probably work even better, especially washable markers would work pretty well. So if you have any of those, you can try those out. I also have some M&M's candy here that I might try and get the color off that outer shell of the candy and see if we can separate out different colors from that dye in there. You're also going to need some solvent. I have some rubbing alcohol right here, and that's going to work really well for my inks. I also have a sink right over here, and I can use some water. So that's why I have 2 glasses, because I'm going to try out both of the solvents. You're also going to need some sort of paper. I have an old part of a coffee filter here. We can use that. The solvents usually go up the coffee filter very quickly, so it's not the cleanest experiment, but it does work. I also have some computer paper that I can use as well. If you have other types of paper, like construction paper, feel free to give that a shot. I have not tried all the different types of paper. I have some really good filter paper at the school I would use, but I'm not at the school, so I'm going to be trying other substitutes. You're also going to want some scissors so you can cut this paper into thin strips, and you might want some tape so you can tape your strips to the edge of the glass. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to put just enough solvent in our glasses to cover the bottom of the glass. So we don't want it to be very deep. So I'm going to take some rubbing alcohol here and pour it in here, and not much. Just a little bit down at the bottom. I could probably use a little more than that. Just enough so that the very end of the strip of paper can go in it and it can soak up that solvent. You don't need to douse it in the solvent. So I'll do it with the rubbing alcohol, set that to the side. I'll also doing it with water here as well. So again, just enough really to cover the bottom of the glass and nothing more. The next step is to cut our strips of paper. So I'll make some out of the normal paper and out of the coffee filter. You don't want these to be too thick of strips. You don't want them to be too thin either. I did it about like this, so somewhere between 1/2 inch and 1 inch thick seems to work pretty well. And you want to cut as many of those as you want to do different dyes. So however many markers or colors you want to test, that's how many strips you should cut. You can also cut some out of the filter here. There, and I have 4 nice strips for myself right here. And you want to make sure that they're tall enough to be able to go down into your glass, into the solvent, and then stick up the top a little bit. So the next step then is to mark up the strips. So we're going to be putting our sample of color on there. So I have these different colored pens. And what we're going to do is not right at the very bottom of the strip, but just near the bottom, maybe somewhere between 1 inch and 1/2 inch up, you're going to make a little line. And I'll show you what I'm doing right here. So you're going to put a little line down there near the bottom so that you can stick this into the solvent, and the line will not go into the solvent, but the little bit below it will. So you're going to stick it down into the solvent about like that. And I'll show you that in a minute. And you'll do that with your other colors as well. So I have a red pen here I can try as well. Maybe I'll try that one on the coffee filter. And you want it to be a nice thick line so there's plenty of ink to go around. So you can go back and forth a few times to make it a thicker line. All right, I'm not going to do the rest of these right now. I'm going to show you how we're going to put them into the glasses. So what we're going to do, and I'll do it on my rubbing alcohol because that tends to be a better solvent for inks, is I have some tape There's lots of different techniques that people use to lower it into the glass. One technique is just to, actually I'll do this one first, just to tape it to the edge of the glass such that the very tip of the paper is going into the solvent. So I don't know if you can see this very well, but I have just the very tip of the paper going into the solvent, and then my line is above that paper. And I have it taped to the top, and it's just going to sit there. Another technique that people use is they will take a pencil, and what they'll do is they'll actually tape the paper to the pencil. I have a pen right here. You'll tape it there, and then you'll set that across the top of the cup so that it goes down in. I have this a little bit long. So this one I actually got the ink into the solvent a little bit, but that'll be okay. So that's another technique that you can use. And it's also worked for me just to stick it in there and then fold it over the top of the glass, and that'll hold it as well. You just want some way to hold it in place. I'm actually going to take this one out for right now. All right, and then what you're going to do is you're going to just let it sit there. And you might want to watch it, but usually it takes a long time for the solvent to actually work its way up through the paper and to soak in. So you might want to go on to doing something else for a few minutes and check back in 5 to 10 minutes. I don't think my solvent has even reached the ink yet. Then once it reaches the ink, it's going to take a long time to separate out the different colors. One other technique I want to show you while we're here is if you want to try doing it on any hard candies, like an M&M, what you can do is, you know how when you grab an M&M with wet hands, you get that color all over your hand? When it's in water, it actually dissolves the dye that's on the outside. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to get a drop of water on my piece of paper here. Just get it a little bit wet down at the bottom. Then I'm just going to take my M&M and rub it on there and make a nice little line. And actually, I ended up breaking my paper when I did that. Let me do it on the coffee filter. Just put a drop of water there. And then get a little bit of the ink on there. And it might be hard to get enough of the ink on there to really do it well, but I have done it successfully before with M&Ms. You can get lots of fun colors coming out of there. All right, so I don't know if you can see this, but I got a little bit of that red color there. It's not a very good line, but it is there. And then you can stick it into your solvent and wait for it to separate out. And you might maybe think of other techniques to get that color onto there. So anyways, you will go ahead and wait then for a while, and after a few minutes you should start to see the solvent pushing up through the ink and hopefully separating out colors. Now I have a few that I was doing just before I started this video. Here's one of a red pen in the alcohol. You can see where my original line was, and you can see something of a magenta color up above it, and then maybe a yellowish red color below that, and almost very faintly another yellow color beneath that. And the original line is very faint because not much of the ink is left there. So I separate out some colors from that. And here's another one that just got started. I think it was a black pen. And I can see kind of a very dark color separating out into blue color, which might not show up on the video very well. But you can experiment around with all sorts of different things. Experiment with highlighters, markers, candies. I've even done it with like those stamps that you put on either your hand or on paper. Those seem to work really well too. So have fun exploring all the different possibilities. And also, don't get discouraged if it doesn't work. Sometimes there are certain inks that are very permanent, and so if I have a permanent marker and then I try to put water through it, it's not really going to wash that permanent marker up through the paper. So there are certain combinations of ink and solvent that don't work very well. And sometimes you might have a pen that has only one colored ink in it, and then there's nothing really to separate out, so you just see that one color moving up the paper, which is still interesting, but not as interesting as getting multiple colors. So if it doesn't work, don't get too discouraged. You can continue to experiment around with different things, and hopefully find something that works. If not, I'll provide a video link in the RenWeb homework notes for you to watch, and you can see some other chromatography that people have done. All right, take care and have fun.